Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. The next 90-ish minutes are going to be outstanding. Artists to Know, celebrating women's artwork. We'll introduce you to some amazing Kentucky artists. You'll have the chance to hear from them about their lives and work. But first, it's our custom to begin each webinar with a brief land acknowledgement. Today, we stand on ground occupied by ancient peoples whose history has been lost, but whose legacy remains. The evidence of these ancient people can be seen all over Kentucky through the mounds and artifacts left behind. Today, over 170 American Indian tribes are represented by their members living and working in the Commonwealth. Let us honor those who were here and those who are here now, and build on the legacy of stewardship of the land they left for us unto the 7th generation. And just to keep you on your edge a bit more, I've got a few announcements, more than a couple. So the Cultural Industry Summit Series is a monthly webinar hosted by the Kentucky Arts Council where we discuss all things art. Like our past webinars, today's will be posted on our YouTube channel for you to watch again and share with others. We're busy working on some upcoming webinars, so we'll have to keep that a mystery for now, but keep an eye on our website, artscouncil.ky.gov, and social media for an announcement about April's webinar. By the way, I'm Tamara Coffey. I'm the Arts Program Branch Manager, and I just realized I hadn't introduced myself. We also have a podcast that we host, and our latest podcast is in honor of Women's History Month and Music in Our Schools Month. 4 of Kentucky's women band directors talk about the past, present, and future of women in the profession, and it's now available at kyartscast.ky.gov, where you'll also find our previous podcasts. We have some upcoming deadlines. The nomination for the Governor's Awards is coming up with a deadline on March 29th. Categories include Outstanding Philanthropy, Contributions to the Arts, Lifetime Achievement in the Arts, Positive Community Impact through the Arts, and more. The guidelines and nomination form are available at artscouncil.ky.gov. Also coming up March 29th is the deadline for Folk and Traditional Arts Apprenticeship Grant, which honors traditional artists and encourages the continuation of Kentucky's living traditional arts by funding mentor artists to teach skills and practices vital to their cultural heritage to less experienced artists within their own communities. You can find those guidelines and application also at artscouncil.ky.gov. We're inviting Kentucky's visual artists from across the Commonwealth to submit work for consideration for the upcoming Governor's Derby exhibit, which will run May 3rd through July 1st in the Capitol Rotunda, so that it's available for viewing by all visitors to the state capitol. All Kentucky visual artists 18 and older are welcome to submit up to 2 entries for consideration. The deadline for that is April 9th. Coming up on April 24th is Kentucky Writers' Day, beginning at 10 a.m. Eastern in the Brown-Forman Room at the Thomas D. Clark Center for Kentucky History here in Frankfort. It's free and open to all. Kentucky Poet Laureate 2023 through 2024, Silas House, will be there, and he'll be joined by 8 of our former poets. There's more information about that on our website, but if you can't come to Frankfort and you still want to celebrate Kentucky Writers' Day in your community, take advantage of some of the ideas we've pulled together in our Kentucky Writers' Day Planning Guide. It's available free and is linked from the front page of our website. Now let's get on to Artists to Know, celebrating women's artwork. Please use the chat throughout the webinar to post questions for our panels of artists. And our panel includes Dr. Kate Hook, a professor of plant biology at Murray State University and an accomplished nature photographer. Lori LaRusso, an American visual artist working primarily with themes of domesticity and foodways. Alicia Martin, an art corset maker and quirky jewelry designer who believes more is more. Elizabeth Mesa-Guido, a mixed media artist who has explored topics such as immigration, assimilation, marginality, cultural identity, history, politics, and illness over a 30-year period. Tiffany Pyatt, a multidisciplinary visual artist poet, activist, and facilitator from Eastern Kentucky, now living in Lexington. And Lakshmi Sraraman, a multidisciplinary artist, a visual artist, jewelry maker, performing artist, educator, choreographer, and arts advocate. As a visual artist, she creates abstract pieces that are created with hand-painted dots, creating visual and tactile textures. We'll show you examples of each of their work throughout the webinar. And our moderator today is Melissa Vandenberg. We should have some samples to show you of hers too. Born and educated in Detroit, Melissa is a multidisciplinary artist, educator, and curator living in Eastern Kentucky. Her work surveys a devolving socio-political landscape using myths surrounding patriotism, pride, and partisanship as points of departure. Melissa received a BFA in 1999 from Center for Creative Studies in Detroit, Michigan, and an MFA in 2005 from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. She has been the recipient of numerous grants, including an Artist Enrichment Grant from the Kentucky Foundation for Women, the Arts Council's Al Smith Fellowship, and 2 Great Meadows Foundation travel grants. She was shortlisted for the Luxembourg Art Prize in 2016. Her work is in the collections of the Birmingham Museum of Art in Alabama, Gummi Fabriken in Varnum, Sweden, 21C Museums, Rockwell Museum in Corning, New York, and the Abrams Engel Institute for the Visual Arts at the University of Alabama. Melissa is an associate professor of art at Eastern Kentucky University and director of the EKU Giles Gallery. Her work is presented by Mouse Contemporary in Birmingham, Alabama, and you can see work samples of hers at www.melissavandenberg.com. And now, Melissa, you're on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that introduction. I want to thank Kentucky Arts Council for trusting me to moderate this morning. To be frank, it's humbling, if not a little intimidating in the best ways possible. These panelists make up a unique cultural cross-section of Kentucky of various media, disciplines, and modes of making. If you know anything about Kentucky, you know creativity is not in short supply. This is exceptionally fertile land when it comes to literature, poetry, performing, and visual arts. As a practicing artist that also directs Giles Gallery at EKU, I'm happy to have the problem of too many prolific makers with too few exhibit slots to represent them all. I think I can speak for the Kentucky Arts Council that our prolific guests, despite their vast talent, are just a sampling of what women in the Commonwealth do. We are a powerful force everywhere throughout the state. There are countless others that could and should be celebrated. So please, let's remember who's not at the table today at this webinar. Oddly enough, today's guests represent transplants to the bluegrass, myself included. I realized in the planning that this is something we all had in common, which I think is worth mentioning. To our guests, I want to thank you for joining us. I noticed some of my colleagues and past and present students in the makeup, so thank you, and thanks for everybody. It means a lot that you're here to celebrate the work of women. We highly encourage you to add questions throughout the chat. KC will help me moderate. Also, to kick us off, I want to ask attendees if you'd like to add a word or 2 or 3 about who you are. Are you a maker? Are you a collector? Are you an educator, a student, an activist, or any combination thereof? I think it'd be extremely enlightening for the panelists to kind of get a sense of who is making up the audience today. Format-wise, we're going to spend about 5 to 8 minutes with each of our panelists at the front end, letting them introduce in their words what they do, what they use, and how they came to their present practice. After this summary perspective on each of our guests, we'll transition to a more organic conversation, hopefully with some questions added from you. First, I'd like to actually pass the floor to Dr. Kate Hugh. Dr. Hugh is a plant biologist and passionate nature photographer. Her works intersect science, art, natural history, and quantitative ecology. Her photography is inspired by the rich biodiversity of various colors and forms in a range of various scales. The images give aesthetic context to the extraordinary displays of the interdependence of plants, animals, humans in breathtaking natural landscapes. She strives to use her camera lens beyond capturing ecological, aesthetic, and artistic values of nature to raise much needed awareness that better environmental stewardship will benefit all species as partners sharing this unique planetary ecosystem. Dr. Hie works have been selected in multiple regional and national art exhibits, in addition to arranging like-minded exhibit opportunities from others, if I remember a bit about what's currently going on. With that, Kate, do you mind introducing a little bit about what brought you to this duality of your research as a plant biologist, in addition to your role as a maker? I believe you said this has been about a 6+ year experience for you in our earlier conversations.
Yes, of course. First of all, I'm very thankful to have this opportunity to meet all the artists and to share my work to a larger public. My artwork all started as a hobby, as I'm trained as a biologist, more on the ecological side. So I'm more concerned about the environment, the habitat conditions, the healthy ecosystems. So I do research on biodiversity and see how biodiversity is affected by human activities. And I do field work, and I take my camera with me whenever I go. I try to capture the species, the plants, the flowers, the pollinators, any type of species in the ecosystem that really inspire me to go deeper down the road to develop more interest in art, in photography.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Sure.
In your photography too, you've got a very close-up tendency, almost a micro tendency, and you're playing quite a bit with depth of field and color. Can you speak a little bit more about why your photography style has evolved in that way? I see a bit of the researcher present in the artifacts, these images that you're taking.
Of course, I feel my photography work really benefited my teaching as I teach botany plant class for 200 level students. And by the way, I enjoy teaching. I love my students. And I try to show the structure for plants, especially the reproductive structure of, of different kind of species. I try to get the close-up images such as the reproductive structure, the male part, the stamens, the female flowers, the petals, the sepals, the carpel. So I thought the micro lens would be, the best for me to capture the details, to have a large, clear image to show my students. So as I go, I feel I'm more attracted to the micrography, the detailed pictures, not only plants, but also I develop the love to birds, because birds also are part of the entire ecosystem. They function as a good pollinators. The bees, the butterflies, they all attract me as I go making photos.
It seems to be pretty common knowledge. There's a lot of endangerment of bird and insect species. I've been remarking on a curiosity on what the summer will be like with insect life, for example, or the shortfall, or just noticing less health of bird populations in the area. With Kentucky in mind, is there a particular species you're really concerned about? Does that impact what you choose to document as a photographer?
My research actually more on invasive species, as we just mentioned, the Blackford pear trees blooming everywhere. I just came back from Virginia Tech during our spring break. On the driveway, everywhere I go, I see the blooms of the pear tree. So, besides the invasive species, I also focus on the native species of Kentucky and to see how native species are impacted by invasive species and other environmental factor changes. So climate change, as I will experience ourselves in person, firsthand, many species are becoming more endangered as temperatures rising, the flooding happens more frequently. So I thought my photography work can raise the awareness to the public how important to keep a healthy ecosystem we have. As we say, we rise or fall all together, right? So having a healthy habitat ecosystem, especially a functioning ecosystem, as they provide tremendous ecosystem services like clean water, clean air, is so important for human ourselves. So I thought maybe taking more pictures, show the pictures to the public, to my classes, my students, not only they can learn the structure, the function of ecosystems, species, but also we can inform the public about environmental issues and how important to keep a intact, healthy ecosystem.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find any creative difference in how you document a native versus invasive species? I'm just sort of curious if that
Yeah.
impacts the way you choose to capture it from a conceptual point of view.
Not exactly. For invasive species, they really follow the humans. So whenever you go, whenever you see neighborhood, the streets, you see the dominant invasive species because humans, without knowing 100 years ago, or even more than 100 years ago, they introduced, exotic species to different locations without knowing they can become invasive. 100 years later.
Yeah.
So typically, when you see invasive species, you see the human, activities there. For native species, they become rare and they just function as any regular ecosystem component.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
I just had a long car ride and of course saw Bradford pears, and soon we'll be seeing kudzu. It's taken over. I've got family in Tennessee, and going south through Kentucky and Tennessee, that's something we see quite a bit of. I'm going to now introduce Lori LaRusso and have Lori talk a little bit about a practice. LaRusso's body of work comprises paintings and installations that dissect matters of class, gender, and anthropocentrism, and how these specific practices reflect and shape culture. Her work is exhibited widely in the US and included in numerous public collections, such as the KMAC Contemporary Art Museum, 21C Museums, as well as various other private collections. She has been awarded notable residency fellowships, the Kentucky Arts Council Al Smith Fellowship, the South Arts Fellowship, the multiple grants from Great Meadows Foundation and the Kentucky Foundation for Women. Lori earned an MFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art and a BFA from the University of Cincinnati College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning. She currently lives and works in Louisville, and her work is represented by Gallery Urbane out of Dallas, Texas, and Ruben Red Gallery out of Palm Springs, California. I've also had the personal privilege of exhibiting with Lori several times and doing a residency with Lori in the past. Lori, can you tell us a little bit about maybe what brought you to Kentucky and your choice of materials specifically? Because you have a way of building painting and environments that still encompasses a lot of painterly activity as a painter, but they're also very built in that sense. And I like that structure, if you could speak to that.
Thanks, Melissa. It's nice to talk to you and the other artists. I came to Kentucky kind of by accident, not on purpose. A long story, but we were helping care for some family members in the area and moved in this direction. And lived in Lexington for a handful of years, and now I'm in Louisville. So I didn't come to Kentucky on purpose, but I found Louisville especially to be a decent place for artists to be, at least for myself as an artist. It's worked well for me. The paintings I make, you can kind of probably see some in the background. I'm in my studio. Most of them are on panels, but occasionally I work in a modular capacity. So I paint images on panels, and then I combine the animals to create a more installative situation. So there is like some sort of a dimensionality. Whether or not they're actually sculptural is I'm unclear as to whether or not to describe them that way. I think something about a painting that exists on the wall and comes in onto the floor, for example, feels both more real and more fake at the same time. And I really like that uncanny quality of the work. Something about it being flat yet representative feels hyper real, but also
Mhm.
super fake. I just said the same thing twice, but that's the idea that sticks with me.
Well, the works almost represent the same thing twice. Like the surfaces, if you get the pleasure of seeing Lori's work in person, the surfaces are so textural. Having had the weird opportunity to have a residency near you and watch you work, and the balls of tape that are produced as you're building up a surface are extremely interesting. But I also know that you've had shapes utilizing CNC, computer numeric sort of printing and cutting to build out these forms that welcome the viewer into these sort of potentially domestic or familiar objects as are represented on the wall. Over the course of your painting career, can you talk a little bit about how your painting self started and how maybe you ended up at this particular methodology in the studio practice itself?
How much time do you have? So, I mean, my formal education going back to undergrad 20 some years ago was very much based in modernism. Modern painting is what my professors were most interested in color field paintings, which I absolutely loved, a lot of hard edge painting. And then I also had a minor in feminist studies, which now the department is called something different, but studied different cultures and gender and sexuality and class and all of that as it pertains to the world we live in. So I think what I was able to do, or what I was most interested in doing, is taking my excitement about color and shape and form and combining it with my interest in the way the world is how it is, systemic structures that kind of dictate our lives. And it's kind of like a ping pong back and forth. So I'm creating these images and I'm thinking about these ideas. The masking started with a lot of stripes. So you're talking about the surface. I do a lot of masking. So if you look at my paintings, especially in person, I try to show more details, but sometimes it doesn't read digitally as well as I would like it to. I lay down tape and then I cut out sections with an X-Acto knife and then I paint sections and I pull the tape off and I do it over and over and over and over again. So most of the paintings are comprised of a bunch of shapes of flat color. Sometimes there's some more blending happening in there, but there's definitely this kind of hard edge quality to it. So I think it started with stripes years and years ago. This is the quick answer. And then over time, I kind of just started to stretch what I could do with that. You know, could I curve an edge? Could I bend the tape? Could I cut into it? And it just has evolved to where we are now.
It seems to be, and forgive me if I'm misspeaking, a very additive and subtractive process in working. So in that sense too, I think it's sculptural in triple ways. For if your work could go a particular direction next, or is there any particular media or thing that you're interested in working with moving forward, knowing what we do about your work?
I mean, there's always a big list, and I never get to it. I have
we
had
won't
some
hold
thoughts.
we won't hold you accountable.
I mean, I want to do everything, but I'm always just so excited about what I'm doing right now, even though it doesn't always work out the way I think it should. You know, one of the things I've been thinking about, I'm not going to say this is the most exciting thing, but one of the things is thinking about how my work could exist in spaces outdoors, because I have been working with some materials. I mean, I'm very careful about my materials and adhesion and working with materials that are archival and are meant to live forever, as they say, in a museum or in someone's home. But I've been approached about work in public or outdoor spaces. And I think that there's a way forward. I would just have to shift the materials that I'm using in order to make sure that I maintain the integrity of the object. So that might be something that I explore in the future.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to move on to a brief introduction of Alicia Martin, one of our other panelists. And I'm going to quote some amazing statements off of her website. "You are a bad button, Alicia Martin. Who knew a throwaway line from a friend would turn into something much more? Having collected them through college and beyond, head corseteer Alicia is still known for her extensive assortment of buttons. That and the beautiful corsets she makes at The Bad Button. Melding her unique experience in forensic anthropology and archaeology with museum work, where she first got her hands on antique corsets, Alicia blends her historical and anatomical knowledge with contemporary values to create the kind of well-crafted corsetry that takes pride of place in many wardrobes. Recently, she has also begun creating distinctive acrylic jewelry that harmonizes with her corsets. Alicia, thank you so much for joining us. Can you talk a little bit about specifically the corset?
Well, that's one of the things that I've been doing now for, gosh, over 19 years. Like a lot of people, you start out doing things not necessarily as a hobby, but as a learning experience. And then slowly you realize, oh, I'm very good at this, actually. And for me, because I had thank you for the Stegosaurus necklace. It actually is meant to match with one of the corsets I've made, since I see that in the chat. I had the anatomy background because once upon a time I thought that I was going to be a forensic anthropologist, and took that in a lot of archaeology field work, and had experience going into the morgue and studying anatomy. And a couple of different things happened at the end of that. Went, I don't think this is actually what I want to do. Had a crisis and went, I need to go into something else, and decided to go into, be a museum professional in a lot of ways. And I happened to work with a lot of really great corsets in a lot of the collections. And at the end of every day, I would go home and go, well, these are just undergarments. These, now we can wear them as fashion pieces, but how do I take that knowledge of how more modern bodies are? We're slightly taller, we're a little bit heavier, not a lot more actually, but, and how do you take this garment and figure it out for a more modern body, a more modern presentation? I have a very feminine, kind of quirky, feel for my own self. I joke that I am somewhere between Rainbow Bright and Strawberry Shortcake in my own dressing, as can be seen by the bright pink hair. And when I am looking at somebody's body, for example, because I have a statement that I tell everyone, which is, I can make corsets for every body. Not everybody wants to wear them, mind you, but after having made somewhere north of 3,000 of the darn things, it's like I'm very familiar with working with people's bodies, because I like to think of corsets as not just a corrective device, so they can be that, not just a piece of fashion, though once again it can be that. It's also a method in which we can project who we want to be into the world. As somebody who's got a lot of chronic pain and an autoimmune disease, I go through life not always liking my own body. I would love to love my own body, but sometimes you just kind of have to roll with things and admit that it's what gets you through the world. And so I see corsets as kind of this way of taking the body as the substrate and being able to work with a client whenever I'm working with somebody, but whenever it's my own self, use that body knowing that it is the basis of where we are going to go in showing who this person is, what story I'm trying to create, all sorts of different things, because being the only one in Kentucky who does this professionally full time, it's not a hobby or anything like that. And actually for several states around, it means that I get a lot of different people who are looking for a lot of different things from their corset. And I consider a lot of what I do to be a collaborative process, not just me telling this one person this is what they're going to get, or creating something just, based on my ideas, though I do that with a collection every couple of years or so. But it does mean that I can focus on a person rather than just, some idea of what somebody is.
Thank you. On that note, I'm going to bring up commission in particular. We've got a room full of makers of different modes and disciplines here today, and some students. So with this range of emerging and established folks in the creative field, can you talk about this collaboration of the commission of a corset? Because as you said, this is your full-time gig. A lot of makers, we have multiple hustles. This is your primary hustle. Can you speak to that relationship of the commission with a client a little bit more?
Yeah, so I actually have been let's see, I officially went professional back in 2010, according to my letters of incorporation and my Facebook profile, which I honestly had to go and looking for that to be able to remember when that date was. But yes, this is my full-time job. This is something that while when I first started, I was doing it part-time, but I have been doing this full-time, God, for years now. And I don't believe in the starving artist trope. I really don't. As far as I'm concerned, being a professional full-time artist means whether it's, getting commissions from somebody or being paid as an educator to do things that we in general, as artists, but especially women artists in particular, tend to participate in a race to the bottom by constantly devaluing our own work. Because we're afraid of charging the value of our own work. I look at it going, I have a mortgage to pay. I can't afford to devalue my own work. And especially after I've been doing it for so long, I don't feel like I have that imposter syndrome anymore on that anyway. Other things in life, sure. But in that, I solidly mid-career here. I don't feel like I need to explain things, but I do have clients that maybe aren't as familiar with things. And so I have everybody from repeat clients or people who wear corsets on the regular to new people who may like the idea of a corset, but don't really know beyond that. So I kind of jokingly say that I'm an educator who makes corsets, not just a corset maker who educates people, because my website is set up where anybody who can contact me. I do events all over the country, actually, too. I think I'm doing 10 or 12 this year where I'm in all different states and get orders whenever I'm at shows, sell things off the rack. But it means that people can come to me and say, I like this historical style, or I like this modern style. How do we work me into this? How do we get things going on this? And one thing I always say is that, I realize that this is an investment, and I'm happy to work with people on the fact that it's an investment. But because it's an investment, it's something that is worth the time and worth the money being put into it, and working with them in that regard. So right now I'm having to look at my whiteboard here, 15 clients on the go, in addition to stock pieces that I have to make up for my shows in April. So I'm constantly busy, a little too much sometimes.
Yeah, I hear you. I appreciate the way you sort of talk about that collaboration as a chance to maybe even educate a client. Can you speak to, before I move on, can you speak to the corset as a potential form of empowerment? Because our historical associations might be more on the oppressive side, organ constriction, breath constriction. Can you speak to the way
Yes.
you view them as an
So
element of confidence?
yes, a lot of that misinformation was often perpetrated by male doctors in the Victorian period who, also believed you'd grow hair on your hands for various things. That sort of, to put it mildly, without going too far in that, they had also a lot of times they were trying to sell their own brand of corsets. So people would say like, oh, that type is bad, but this health corset, this is fine, and it's Dr. So-and-so's health corset. There was also a lot of fetish fiction that talked about tight lacing and things like that. Of course, people are used to seeing very small corsets in collections and think somehow that that's how most people were. That's survivorship bias of what has managed to make its way into a collection, because obviously in the past, clothing was very expensive. The labor was cheap, materials were very expensive. And so we often would hand down or remake things from, if you were a bigger size and you handed it to, a sister, a daughter, a servant, what have you, and they would cut it to their size or whatever. So obviously the smallest sizes that very few people could fit into are the ones that end up in museums. And so we now have this idea based on things like that god awful Scarlett O'Hara scene, 18 inches, that's such crap. I actually have a collection of over 70 antique corsets from 1750 stays to as we transitioned into girdles. And they're all just garments. And so for us today, I get a lot of people who want to wear them underneath their clothes, but a lot of people who are like me and actually, so I'm wearing one of my pieces. I wear them on the
Awesome.
regular. Yeah. One, there's no better advertisement for me than me. But also it helps to let people know that, well, I will do a show where I'm on the floor 12 hours a day and I'm talking, 90 nothing. So if I couldn't breathe in it, then I guess I make a very attractive corpse. So, it's something that people have expectations of anything, but you don't necessarily have to tight lace while wearing a corset. You don't have to be waist training. You don't have to be focusing on these numbers. It's no different than deciding, hey, I'm going to wear a rhinestone jacket. You don't have to have it tight. It's one of those things that there's no better way of me educating people than, especially when I'm at shows, but then to suggest to them, hey, try it on. You don't have to buy it. You don't have to take it with you, but see how you feel. And most of the time people say it feels like a nice hug. And because it is something that they can wear outside of their clothes, you can show who you are, and it also helps quite a bit because it makes your posture much better. And you sit upright. And partially one of the things that we always talk about is, fake it till you make it. And there's all that evidence that shows that if you have better posture and present yourself with better posture, eventually you start to take on those aspects of feeling more in control and more empowered and more able to present yourself to the world.
Thank you for that. I like the self-fulfilling prophecy and sort of correcting some of the misinformation that might be out there. I'm going to move on to introducing Elizabeth Mesa Guiado. Elizabeth is a Cuban-American artist that has lived in Kentucky for over 30 years, exploring topics such as immigration, assimilation, marginality, cultural identity, history, politics, and illness. Her work has been supported through grants and fellowships, including Kentucky Arts Council, the Kentucky Foundation for Women, Great Meadows Foundation, Art Matters, and Alternate Roots. In 2022, she was invited to speak about her work at the International Association of Curators of Contemporary Art Symposium titled Global Appalachia. Her creative scholarship has been published in books, journals, periodicals, and newspapers, including the Surface Design Journal and a book about the history of piñatas by the Contemporary Museum of Art and Design in Costa Rica. She maintains a studio in Moorhead, Kentucky, teaching at Moorhead State University. Thank you for joining us, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Melissa.
Can you speak a little bit about, I'll probably ask you specifically about illness in your write-up, because I'm noticing a common thread between some of our panelists related to this that I might circle back to. So I was going to ask you about maybe notions of art and healing, art that represents suffering, illness, oppression, because your work touches on a lot of important points that I think are being finally addressed in contemporary art on the regular.
Sure. So I have a body of work called Foreign Body Series, and then I have current work that is I think falls into that series. I haven't put it in there yet on my website, but a lot of my work is really based on personal experience, and I do see it as a way to get things out. It is therapeutic for me, and I work through and understand things that are happening in the world or to myself or my family that way. And so the first works that were part of that series were several individuals that family and friends who were diagnosed with cancer. And so it became a way for me to process a very difficult realization about mortality with these individuals. And then more recently with the pandemic, I created two different pieces, installations, where during right after shutdown, so probably around April or May, where I created work based literally on the statistics of how many people were dying in each of the states, and then went on to, after the pandemic, try to process everything that I went through and what we went through collectively with isolation and that kind of psychological trauma, and created the pandemic clouds, which was one of the images that was in that slide. And more recently, a family member of mine has been diagnosed with early stages of dementia. So I am really trying to process that. And so that was one of my other images, herencia, which was the detail with organza and digitally scanned ink washes or drawings that I had printed onto that fabric.
As somebody that's in particular really interested in artists that address current events and politics head on in their practice, can you speak to potentially the responsibility of makers that they can carry being part of that history? You know, exploring politics and current events in art is nothing new, but it does very much seem to take a center role, particularly in the past 8 to 10 years. Can you speak to your own feelings of personal responsibility addressing challenging topics like this?
Absolutely. So, you know, we talked about the series about illness, but a large percentage of my work has actually been based on my own family background, because my parents and most of my family came to the United States as immigrants from Cuba. So, you know, they left a country because of the restriction of being able to speak about things and the diversity of thought and be able to communicate about that. So it's been instilled in me by my family that we should be able to communicate about topics as difficult as it may be, and to be able to present a viewpoint that might also be a point of conversation or education for people. So that's why a lot of my work has dealt with immigration or cultural identity, or more recently, when I finally was able to go to Cuba twice now, but with my family, and seeing what the conditions were in the country, and creating work that drew attention to, or draws attention to, inequity of access to, you know, food, medicine, basic commodities that many people take for granted.
No, thank you for that. Can you speak to your choice of being multidisciplinary? You do have a sculptural and installation object maker-ness to your practice. Is there a particular reason you've chose these vehicles, these materials to represent your body of work, your interests conceptually?
Yeah, you know, I've thought about that a lot. What's interesting, people have been talking about some of their education or background, and my, you know, when I went to grad school, I applied to a painting program, but I was doing like mixed media sculpture, and somehow boundaries haven't, in terms of media, haven't been something that I have worried about. I've actually tried to like not fit into boundaries, and I think part of that, my mother is an artist, and growing up, I would see her like trying and experimenting with different materials. She would draw with wood burning. She did batik, wax resist. And so I think that was instilled in me early. And I myself like to experiment and try different things. And I think that different materials can communicate different things. And as a result, I have, you know, depending on what the project is or what the concept is, I have tried to find the right route for that. And many times I don't know what I'm doing with those materials, and I have to either learn, hit my head against the wall. I have a piece that I started over summer that's still on my wall, literally on my wall, because I cannot figure out how to get it to do what I want. And I will, but I haven't gotten there yet. Or I'll ask somebody to assist in giving me guidance if it's something that they have done before.
Well, thank you for that. With materials in that capacity, particularly since we have a lot of fellow makers and some emerging artists in the group, can you speak a little bit about maybe more about that sort of failure, the experience when something isn't working out for you, just for the kind of audience we have today?
Sure. You know, and many of my students have heard me talk about where I was creating an installation for a faculty exhibit, and 2 days before I was supposed to install it, what I thought was supposed to hang a certain way, those brackets weren't going to work. Like I said, I have this piece that's a continuation of herencia, the piece I talked about earlier with dementia, where I'm trying to go more three-dimensional, but still have a graphic quality. And I have been experimenting now with different kinds of wire. I'm still kind of trying to resolve how to do that. but yeah, it's not something that I will, like, if I have a vision for something and I want it to look a certain way, I will come about around it at it from many different ways as part of my process.
Do you ever learn from the material when it sort of tells us what it wants to do?
Yes. Let me think of an example. I guess so the pandemic clouds might be an example, because I really I had an idea for it and I wasn't sure what it was going to be. And there it's a wire, it was in the slideshow, it's wire bulbous like clouds or virus droplets. And those bulbous sections, I came up with I tried multiple different ways to do it, and then realized that doing a wire structure, and I wanted to use, I wasn't sure how to do the bulbous but soft yet hard surfaces. So I kind of played around with fiber and different kinds of material, and eventually settled with cotton fibers. Like, I was taking cotton balls and actually dissecting them, and then just using the fibers with a paste. And so it worked for me in terms of what I was trying to achieve.
Thank you. And thanks for sharing some of the intimate aspects of a process. I don't know if we're nearly transparent enough sometimes when it comes to the way we get to the final product, because so often people only see the final product. With that, I'm going to move to Tiffany Payette. Tiffany is a poet, a visual artist, a community organizer, a facilitator, and an activist. She builds capacity within several groups and organizations throughout Central Appalachia. She believes storytelling as our greatest asset to connect and communicate with others. Tiffany centers the work in using arts and culture to build community power. Her poetry and artwork can be found in publications such as Digging Through the Fat, The Uncommon Grackle, and Beyond Words. Her artwork has been featured at the state capitol, while in the Native Reflections exhibition. She believes that art and culture are some of our most valuable tools of resistance and healing. Again, I'm hearing this notion of healing. I've heard it in ways from Kate, from Elizabeth, and other panelists. Can you speak a little bit about your work's relationship specifically with healing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
My last collection of art that I made was called Good Medicine. I'm Indigenous, and in Indigenous culture, we call good medicine anything that feeds your soul and makes things better. So laughter is good medicine, song is good medicine, food is good medicine. But I also wanted to take a play on that to also involve medical supplies in my work. Because as a disabled person, medical supplies are they are comforting and healing to me, as well as the other things that are good medicine. So that showcase has a mixture of both. Like the weaving piece in the examples that you all saw, that's woven medical tape that has been painted with watercolors that I made from foraged pigments from the land. As an Indigenous person, it's important for me to make my arts practice with the land in traditional ways, and to also use that with these other things that maybe feel cold or strange to other people. I wanted people to look at them and be like, oh, that's fabric, that looks nice. And I invited people to touch the piece so that it felt, and it's called Quilt Marmalade. There are 4 quilt pieces, and I wanted them all to have kind of joyful names so that medical tape would be looked at differently. I think healing is a really important part of my work, because I think creating art is healing for me. I think creating art with my community is deeply healing. I think it's how we process so much of what happens in the world around us.
Yeah, I think that responsibility is of the utmost importance right now to our communities. Can you speak a little bit about the relationship between writing and your visual practice? There's so many folks on the panel today that have a duality or just a multimodal approach to creativity in general. and you equally value your community organization, your activism in poetry in the same realm as you do your visual practice. Can you speak to some of those intersections for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think presenting written work in connection with visual work is really important. Sometimes that can be like photography along with the written word. I think capturing the place where words come to you is a really powerful connection. I also think that as many ways as we can speak to someone and to say what we want to say is a good thing. And I like honoring that, like, some people will get the message a different way. So I like to provide as many options that folks can get. I think that poetry is really powerful and it hits in many ways, but there should be accompanying visual some of the time. And so I like to make that possible when I can.
Can you expound a little bit on making with others, making with the community, their hands-on investment in what you do?
Yeah. So sometimes I teach art. I've done some residency at the Heinemann Settlement School, for example, and I get to teach kids. I've had lots of opportunities to teach children in different ways, and that's so lovely because you get to just introduce them to many different mediums and just watch them truly express themselves and learn that copper gilding isn't hard, for example, and not intimidating, and break some of those barriers. I also really find that like teaching people how to make their own paint and how foraging to the paint process works. I think that's really powerful and beautiful, and is like a cultural lesson that I think folks really enjoy being a part of. And I think with community organizing, making art together allows you to all be saying the same message. And I think that's really cool. Like a community organization that I'm in, we built a puppet, like a multiple person puppet with wire and paper mache and paint and 3D printing and all of those elements that took many people to build, but we all got to say the same statement with it. And I think that was beautiful and exciting and also very joyous. I think movement work should have joy in it, and I think art is how we sustain that.
Thank you. Actually, on that note, I'm going to use joy as our segue to our final panelists before we move into a bit of group discussion. Lakshmi Sriraman is a Kentucky crafted artist who started painting at 2 years old. She's self-taught, pulling inspiration from Indian and Aboriginal art. She explores various paint applications with visible joy and energy. Joy is a recurring theme when Lakshmi is speaking about their work, sometimes even singing in the process of creation. Sriraman was born in India. After completing her master's in mathematics, she immigrated to the US, pursuing an MBA from the University of Texas at El Paso. After a decade of working as a management consultant, she took up a classical dance form, I'm going to butcher it, Bharatanatyam. In addition to performing and choreographing, she runs the Shri School of Dance. Lakshmi is an internationally known I'm going to try again. I will get this right. Bharatanatyam performing artist, recognized by KAC as a featured artist in 2018. Lakshmi, can you also speak to this duality of practice? You're singing, you're a dance educator and a dancer. You're physical in the act of painting. Can you speak a little bit about these overlaps and what it's like to create a creative career in all these different modes?
First of all, I want to thank Kentucky Arts Council for inviting me to this forum. I'm very honored by this invitation. And I want to take responsibility for a couple of misrepresentations, I think, on my website. I started painting in 2017 and I started dancing when I was 2 years old.
My
So-
apologies.
No, I think there is some information that's not very clear on my website. How do they work with each other? Was that your question?
Yeah, this overlap, it's a common theme
This-
between our panelists. So if you could speak a little more to that.
Yeah, so in addition to all the things you mentioned, I have also taught college level math. I've been an IT professional. So they all have shaped me in many different ways. And I think at any point, whichever project I'm working on or whichever medium of art I'm working on, they all sort of inform me. Not maybe in the forefront, but there is always this level of engagement with all these different selves. And especially with dance, performing arts, I would say, because even in my dance practice, I've integrated Indian theater techniques. I do a lot of dance theater work with spoken words and things like that. And when I am painting on a canvas, so to speak, I paint in silence and I set an intent before I paint, and I'm an intuitive artist. Many times I don't know what's going to show up on the canvas. Many times I would think that I am going in one direction and all of a sudden I'll be going in another and I'll be like, oh, this is better than what I thought. So that is part of my process. But also when I do that, currently my dance studio and my painting studio are right next to each other. So when I'm in the middle of painting, I would keep my brush down and go do a little movement to integrate that into my body or to just express it through movement. And I really don't know what happens, but I feel more clear in my vision, or there is this sense of ease that goes into my process of creating. And likewise, like my paintings, there is a lot of movement, people say. I'm a self-taught artist, so I never took lessons to understand the techniques or the more taught ways of approaching art. All of my art is created because I made mistakes. And I'm like, oh, this is great. What I thought was a mistake was a new way of doing it. So that is how my art evolved. And that is how my dances evolved over years. So I borrowed that process here to just lab my work and to figure out what is it that I want to do. And so they're in constant conversation, I think, in a part of me that I'm not even aware of.
Thank you for that. Can you speak to, and I might use this as a segue to bring in the rest of the group here shortly, but can you speak to, so you talk about being self-taught, but you're also a dance educator with the Shri School of Dance. Can you speak to what the active education or having students brings to your painting practice towards the visual artifact that's left behind? Because you mentioned even in your statement about singing to the paint, but you say here you paint in silence. So maybe you can offer a little clarity for that too.
Yeah. I don't listen to music or a podcast or something when I'm painting. It's done absolutely in silence. But every now and then I'll go to my, where my canvases are, and I would sing to them, wake them up, and infuse them with a life, so to speak, activate them. The way that I have approached dance, first of all, let me take a step back and share that the dance form I practice is a very ancient dance form. And it's a traditionally codified dance form. It takes years to be a performer. Right, so it's lot of lineage is transmitted through that, lot of tradition and philosophies and a lot of those things, and which is a huge departure for me in my visual art, which is like I am not trained in it. I'm just making it up. So there is a level of immense freedom that I feel, because in my practicing Bharatanatyam and also in my own pedagogy approach to teaching, I had to unlearn a lot of the things that was taught to me to teach my students, to have agency and to discover themselves in the process. But I find my dance, my painting to be like the complete opposite. I do whatever I want. So it's diametrically opposite and very free at the same time.
Oh, thank you for that clarification. That makes a lot of sense. In one place, a way to embrace the classic, the traditions associated with our creative interests, and another place having complete freedom. With that, I would like to actually transition to maybe more of organic group discussion between all of the panelists. There's several things that came up when we were kind of comparing notes as panelists. One being that I'll kick things off with that we are transplants. We are immigrants in some cases to Kentucky specifically. I would like to ask the question twofold for those that might want to answer it. And Lori talked about this briefly in her answer about what maybe brought you to Kentucky. Because one thing we definitely have in common is we've all chosen Kentucky home, very specifically, whether it be for logistic career reasons, but also maybe perhaps because of what Kentucky offers us in terms of support. I know for me, the rich craft histories of the Southeast in particular lend itself well to my own interest in fibers. Can some of you in our panel speak to why Kentucky and or what Kentucky offers you specifically in way of support, or even challenges, to be totally honest, because it's not all roses, right?
Can I go first?
Please. Thank you, Tiffany.
Okay. I don't 100% consider myself a transplant because I was born over the state line, but my tribe's traditional territory was both Virginia and Kentucky. And so while I was born in Virginia, when I moved to Kentucky, it didn't feel like I was going to a different place. It felt like I was still continuing my time on my ancestral lands. And part of why I choose Kentucky is because I feel an obligation and a belonging that runs really deep. And I don't feel that I can abandon it. In times that I've tried to move away, it didn't feel right. Like Eastern Kentucky is a very specific and beautiful place. And like my work in processing materials with the land, for me, can only happen there. So like when it's time for me to go foraging for pigments, that happens in Letcher County every year for me. And that's part of why I choose the place, is that's the place that I know how to care for and commune with. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. It brings to mind the arbitrariness of contemporary borders and boundaries in those senses. Can anybody else speak to why Kentucky and or challenges or advantages Kentucky has given you?
Well, oh, sorry. Do you want to go first,
No,
Elizabeth?
you go ahead, Alicia.
Oh, thank you. Growing up as a military brat, I don't have a very defined sense of place. I have to definitely acknowledge that. I've lived here in Kentucky for the longest, just because, hey, I bought a house here. So as long as I pay that mortgage, I'm going to be here. It's a practical thing with me. I moved down here to take a job. And I'll be honest, the thing that's keeping me here is actually my husband's job. Because he's got a good steady job. And the advantage of being an artist in a lot of ways is that you can kind of go to a lot of places. I understand people whose art makes them feel more connected to land or anything like that. But my mother's a professional artist. And, I saw her growing up. We would, move to Germany, move around Germany, move, back to the States, move wherever. And it was, you pick up and make your home where your home is at the moment. Home isn't a place so much as a feeling for you when you grow up like that. But for me, Kentucky is a challenge because it's kind of flyover country. You know, it's the middle of nowhere for a lot of different art, you know, events and stuff. I love the Arts Council and I love doing Kentucky Crafted and things like that, but I can't survive off of Kentucky alone, so I travel a lot for my own stuff. The great thing about it is, though, that 8 hours in most directions can get you to a lot of places.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
for that. Elizabeth, please.
Yeah, so my first time in Kentucky was an exhibit. Transylvania University did a non-traditional book exhibit, and I was included, and I was doing work that I came out of a program that was painting, and they didn't understand what I was doing as a 3D mixed media person. And so being accepted in that show and seeing all these other artists who were doing non-traditional work was really big for me. And then by coincidence, 6 to 7 months later, I ended up working part-time at Morehead State University, which led to a full-time job. But I like your question about we chose to stay here. And I chose to stay here because of my students, the people, and also the arts were supported. Within 2 to 3 years of being here, I had met like Erwin Pickett from the Kentucky Arts Council, Heike Pickett, who had an exhibit, who had a gallery, and gave me a small solo exhibit. And the Kentucky Arts Council, the Kentucky Foundation for Women, their support changed my life as an artist. Like I could not have done the body of work and started on the trajectory that I did without them. So to me, that was really huge. And I agree with Alicia, you know, we are centrally located in terms of for a person doing installation who has to drive their work in many different directions. I could travel most of the country within a day to deliver, install, and come back and teach as well.
Yeah, I think that geography, it presently is super important, but even historically, the state itself, the way even Cumberland Gap sort of funneled folks in to settle originally in the area, I think is important. On that note, you brought up education. There's quite a number of educators in the most formal or least formal of sense on our panel. We educate in different ways. Is anybody willing to speak to their students, how that active education maybe impacts your practice, your process, even your schedule? Because the reality is most of us, I don't get to make every day in the studio, not even necessarily every week. It happens in bursts and it's in deep relationship with education. Can anybody add to that for me?
I can jump into that.
Thank you, Kate.
Sure. As educator, you know, a full-time faculty member at Morehead State University, of course, teaching does impact what I do and how I choose a subject to photograph. I always believe science as a scientist and art are interrelated, as a discovery and invention can go hand in hand. I am sure you all agree with me on this. So I use a lot of photos in my lecture slides to get a point across. For example, when I lecture symbiosis, the mutual relationship between species found in nature, I tend to use a micro photo using a pollination in action photo to show the butterfly pollinates flowers or the birds visit nectars, right? Those are good storytelling images for my class. And also when I teach conservation biology, like right now, I tend to use photographs taken from national parks to show the beauty and the value of natural ecosystems and how important to keep the intact landscape healthy and functioning, as I believe art and science are inseparable. And we use a lot of photos, micrographs, flow chart, drawings in our teaching, just like many of my colleagues here. I'm sure other artists here too. So I also believe artistic images can definitely provide different thinking, different thoughts in the process of scientific discovery. And also I'm really grateful the Kentucky Art Council have provided many opportunities for artists to showcase the work. I have participated in 2 exhibitions One is the Governor's Derby exhibition. The other one is the Commonwealth to Continent to Commonwealth traveling exhibition. Right now, actually, it's in Murray, in the Murray Field. It's really cool. I was so honored to be selected, my work to be selected in the exhibition. So I'm really thankful, and I really think being a transplant of Kentucky, we develop a deep love to the place, not because of nature, but the people, the culture, the students. And it's just a part of the life. Me and my husband and I, we raised the two boys, two sons in Kentucky, and we really enjoy the small college town living. And we definitely call Kentucky home after living in Murray over 24 years now. Yeah, so.
Thank you. Does anybody want to add to that discussion of artist educator? I think the impact is in most cases beneficial. I'd also like to take a little bit of a moment to plug some of the institutions that our artists are citing. Obviously, the Kentucky Arts Council has been a powerhouse of support for so many of us. As somebody that's personally received grants, I'll also shout back out to Kentucky Foundation for Women, Great Meadows Foundation as well, because a lot of us have received really specific support from them. And as an installation artist in many cases, without that support, the work just doesn't happen. So I want to harden that plug. I've got one question in the chat that's really similar to one I have in my short list here, and we only have about 10 minutes, 15 minutes left. It asks, as an artist woman in general or an immigrant one, what are the main challenges in this country? That could be, of course, in this state. It's a lofty question, something that could be a panel isolated all to itself. But does anybody want to address some of the specific challenges for us here now?
Yeah, I would like to share my experience and perspective on that. Well, I have to first differentiate that the experiences I've had as a performing artist and a visual artist have overlaps, but they have been very different. As a performing artist, so I practice this very specific dance form called Bharatanatyam. So when I would tell people that when I first came to Kentucky, which was 20 years ago, tell people that I do Indian classical dance, and they'll be like, Bollywood? And I would be like, well, Bollywood has taken some aspects of my dance, but this is different. And so there was a lot of education going on. People didn't know what it was. It was very difficult for me to find a space to perform, to be invited, so on and so forth. So I ended up producing a lot of my shows, which is very different if you were in a larger city. There is much more awareness, opportunities, and all that. But with my visual art, I have seen that, and I will make a plug for equity here. Because my brown-skinned body in a very exotic costume is not on stage. That can be easily othered. It's a visual thing that people can take their time understanding and communicating with. They have been much more easily and widely accepted. Also, having said that, I would say that my reaching out to a lot of galleries, other spaces, because my name obviously is different, I have found very watered down response. So there is that also going on. It's been challenging. It's getting better, I would like to say, but I am not sure.
Still room for improvement. I saw Elizabeth's head at the front end of that question. Did you want to add anything to the specific challenges that we're facing? Sort of state of women in the art, if you will.
It's not really about artists, though. It's just about women. So that's why I was hesitant about. Yeah, I mean, so I came to Kentucky in 1992, and Kentucky has changed a lot since I arrived, and my institution has changed a lot. And I remember when I arrived, I'm one of three daughters, so I, I didn't see any boundaries in what I could do. I was raised to do whatever I wanted to do. So I do remember coming to Kentucky and feeling like somehow I was considered inferior, or lack of representation of women on campus. And that would be artists as well, because I was the first full-time person hired when I arrived anyways. And that has changed dramatically. I think Kentucky has changed over the last 3 decades. I just think women in general, it's a very difficult time right now. I feel like we've gone back a little bit. So it's not really about the artist part, and this is about art, so I don't want to go too far into that, but I think many people might feel similarly.
Well, they're inextricably linked. We're making art about life, so those two things are joined at the hip. I guess on that note, I'll expand that question and sort of shout out for some responses again. I feel that part of supporting female makers is essential. We need to equally be supporting artists of color, LGBTQ artists, and creatives with disabilities. We do very much rise and fall together. This might be difficult to answer, but how can we continue to rise together? Where can we be more proactive? What are we doing? What should we be doing? It's a lofty question to throw out there, but I'd be curious about some of your responses.
I have a response.
Please, thank you, Lori.
Kind of to speak more to Elizabeth, I mean, I think that some of these things are about art, but they're not specifically about art, but they are, because they affect our lives. And so I think issues around reproductive healthcare, healthcare in general, women in general tend to be, the burden of caregiving tends to fall more heavily on women, whether it's childcare or elder care. Also having access to healthcare so that we can care for ourselves, having healthcare that isn't tied to a partner or full-time employment would be huge for me as an artist, because I file my taxes with a handful of 1099s, and I don't have access, on my own to good health plan. So I know that these are bigger, loftier issues and they fall within the realm of politics, but I think that they're essential for me as an artist and as a woman in Kentucky and in America. I feel very strongly about those things. So I'm just going to put that out there. Thanks.
Would anybody else like to add?
I would like to add to that. Alicia, I mean, from the first day I saw her, she's always been talking about thriving artists, right? So when I tell people that I am an artist, and they're like, "Oh, so how do you pay your bills?" And this is it's. I mean, I hope people stop asking those questions, because that's also indicative of society that supports women artists, women makers, women entrepreneurs, especially art entrepreneurs. And and this is something I pick up on an intuitive level. There is this shift in people treat, when I am showing an exhibit, let's say, with male artists, the way they would interact with me is different, I have seen, than they would interact with a male artist. So there is that kind of approaching women artists differently. And I don't know how we would fix it. We need to have more discussions around it, and highlight women makers, artists, entrepreneurs' work till such time it's not needed anymore, because we have done the work by highlighting them and talking about it.
Well, and if I can, I'm going to use this for a loaded segue. A conversation the panel and I sort of started having on Sunday at a brief meet and greet we had was regarding the all women's exhibit, the pros and cons of the all women's exhibit. Because I say yes to some, I say no to some. Would this group like to talk about, address the advantages or disadvantages of the all women's exhibit now? In the Commonwealth and elsewhere. This isn't a Kentucky-centric situation that we're confronted with.
For me,
Can I go again? I'm sorry. No, go ahead, Tiffany.
Go ahead, Tiffany.
Okay. For me, it's usually a no, because some exhibits are if they want women only, they mean that they want to hardline your identity. And I'm a two-spirit woman, which does not preclude me from being a woman, but within my culture's gender identity options, I'm also other things. And so I'm not always certain personally if a women's exhibit is meant for me. And there's a bit of a question mark on if there's gender expansive options for those artists, and I'm not sure if I should have the conversation. So sometimes I opt out.
And
Yeah.
I'll please go ahead.
Yeah, I say no usually if it is well-established organization that's inviting me, and I would say, why now? Why not during your regular curation, right? I refuse to be tokenized that way as a woman and a woman of color. But when it is when it's with other women who we are trying to lift ourselves up, I want to lend my voice to that, because these women are not at a level where they can show in larger venues. And I want to be in allyship with all women. And so that's how I make that distinction and decision.
I think that's an interesting mode of our caretaking too. Lori brought up the likelihood that we are the primary caretaker, elder care, child care, in many cases, in a traditional and very much a contemporary sense still. I think that's interesting that we bring up allyship, because it's a responsibility. I think I can speak for all the panelists that we feel very close to, back to that notion of rising and falling together. I think with the Women's Show too, it's worth mentioning what the institution itself is already doing. Are women part of the regular programming? And is this an additional asset thereof? If they're not part of the regular programming, this is their version of correcting something, which good for them, but it's supposed to be something that's embedded in all aspects of public programming. We're down about the last 8 minutes, and I actually want to ask a question, and this will be something the artists can add to the chat if they'd like. And actually any participant. I'm going to point out the little 3-dot ellipsis in the chat where you can save the chat history, because there's a lot of good links and information being tossed there. On this note of rising and falling together, and the fact that this panel has 6 powerhouses involved, there's a lot of folks in the Commonwealth that aren't represented, past, present, and emerging makers. Is there anybody the panel wants to sort of shout out to, a fellow maker they'd like to plug, a social or a website they feel like adding to the chat for posterity's sake? How do we better celebrate others that aren't part of this conversation in the public way today? I see, ooh, wonderful. I see lots of information being thrown in there now. I'm going to add to this. Hopefully this is a way to drive traffic to people's sites, to their socials, so that we're actually filling our feed with something a little bit more satiating. As other folks add to that, I've got a couple of closing questions I want to go through. And KAC, please interrupt me, because you're probably going to need the floor again before we take off. For our panel, does anybody, I know a few of you have some upcoming events in the very near future. Does anybody want to plug an upcoming exhibit, talk, fair, market, etc., that they might be involved with?
Yes, Melissa. I'd like to mention we are organizing a biodiversity art exhibition. This is our 2nd year to have this program. And we have more than 80 submissions this year. So I'm hoping we can expand the program to a state level. So this is a nature-based, nature-focused photo exhibition. Actually, not just photos, but any kind of 2D art, 3D art, any type of installations will be acceptable. So I'm hoping to get funding from the state and make a larger call for next year. This is one of the events to celebrate Earth Day next month. So I'm hoping we will do more and get funding to support this activity.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Sure.
What's next for some of the rest of the panel?
I have a few things going on outside of Kentucky, but since this is Kentucky,
Please.
I'm in an exhibit right now at the Art Center of the Bluegrass in Danville with two other artists who are women, Linda Ross and Tamisha Lovely Allen, who are both great artists. I'll put their info in the chat. And it's about Southern womanhood. So it was an interesting exhibit to participate in. And if you're in Danville, you can check it out.
Thank you. And again, what I'm asking you to, or giving this platform to plug for a second, it does not need to be in Kentucky because frankly, Kentucky's everywhere. We're all over the place, not just the country, but the world.
Well,
I put a,
oh,
Alicia,
we keep
you,
each other. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I just put a link in the chat. If somebody wants to learn more about the Cuban American piñatas, KET did a segment recently. It's airing right now, so.
Fabulous. Congratulations.
For me, in particular, I actually have a page on my website under appearances that shows where I'm going to be next. But I'm traveling around the country doing the Oddities and Curiosities expos because apparently goths love my work, and I'm happy to be in that niche. And the next two are going to be at the end of April. One is going to be up in Columbus, and one is going to be up in Indianapolis. Don't ask me which weekend is which. I just kind of go where my calendar says, so I need to go that weekend.
Wonderful. Tiffany, your web link says it's sold out. And comment from
Which
Sharon.
is
in
a
there.
good thing. That
Yeah.
means a lot of people are coming. But if anyone is interested in learning about rematriation work in Appalachia that's starting, feel free to get into contact with me and I can get you a recording afterwards.
Well, and I'll remind everybody, click the little 3 dots if you want to save the chat and keep some of these links. I really want to drive support to these folks that were mentioned today. And I want to thank everybody for attending. This has been phenomenal, and it's quite the privilege to moderate a panel like this. And this platform is obviously should be one of many. With that, I'll hand the panel back to Tamara to close.
Thank you, Melissa. I am truly in awe of the company we've kept today. I feel very fortunate. This webinar could have lasted at least another hour, and I would still be wanting more. Thanks to our moderator, Melissa Vandenberg, for pulling everything together and providing us with this amazing webinar. And thank you to our panel, Kate Hook, Lori LaRusso, Alicia Martin, Elizabeth Mesa Guido, Tiffany Payette, and Lakshmi Sraran. Sorry about that, Lakshmi. It's been a joy, really, learning more about you and your work. And I look forward to seeing your work in the future. Before we go, I just want to say, take a minute to check out our current traveling exhibit, Continent to Commonwealth, Asian American Kentucky Art. The Kentucky Arts Council, in partnership with Asia Institute Crane House and the Kentucky Chinese American Association, invited Asian American and Pacific Islanders in Kentucky to share their visual art. Dozens of artists answered the calls, including Kate and Lakshmi. And we now have an amazing exhibit that's been traveling around the state. It'll open next on April 3rd in Berea at the Berea Arts Council. You can check out a slideshow of the Continent to Commonwealth exhibit and look at slides of past exhibits on our website at artscouncil.ky.gov. Look for Showcasing the Arts and click on Exhibits. Finally, check our website for information about upcoming Creative Industry Summit Series, webinars, and program deadlines. To have information delivered to your email monthly, sign up to receive Arts e-News, our monthly e-newsletter, by going to artscouncil.ky.gov and click the blue subscribe button. Thanks so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Until then, take care.
Bye, everybody.